In this video, I'm going to go over how I do skin work. The first thing is I duplicate the background twice. So I hit Command J 2 times, or you can select Layer, New, and Layer via Copy. This first one, I'm going to name Low. And this top one, I'm going to name it High. Basically, I'm separating the tones and the texture. So here on the low layer, I'm going to go up to Filter, Blur, and add a Gaussian, or I'm not sure how you pronounce it. I've heard it 5-10 different ways. But I'm going to use this one. And basically, you just want to go until you can't see the imperfections in her face. I think this would be way too much. Obviously, there's nothing there. But I'm going to go maybe with an 8. And the next thing you want to do is go up to this high layer, Image, Apply Image, and you want to make sure the blending is on Subtract, the scale is 2, and the offset is 128, and the layer that you are working on is Low. And after this is done, just press OK. Now we're going to go up to the blending mode here and take it to linear light. I group these 2 layers together so that I can quickly check to see what I've done. Now, the high layer is for texture and the low layer is for color and for light and dark tones, like if there's blotchiness, if you want to smooth this area out, get rid of under eye dark circles, or this kind of area, or even this here where it may be a bathing suit or a tank top. So I'm going to first start on the low layer, and I'm going to select my lasso tool, and I'm going to zoom in here. And first I kind of want to get rid of some of the blotchiness, like some areas here, and kind of blend it so it's not so blotchy. So I'm going to take my lasso tool, and my feather is about 30 pixels, and I'm just going to select this area here, and I'm going to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and you can see what this is doing. It's not affecting the texture at all. Obviously that's way too much. It's not affecting the texture, it's only affecting the tones of the image and the blotchiness. So I'm going to take this to about here to smooth that out. And I'm going to go around her face and do the same thing. Wherever I want to kind of blur and blend what's happening. And I think that's a little bit too much. And if you notice, it's still not affecting the texture, and that's why I like this method so well. I'm going to select a bigger piece. I try to select quite a big chunk at a time, but not so much that it's her entire face, because you want to stay away from the areas like the eye and the hair and the eyebrows and the nostrils and lips and things. So I'm just going through and I'm blurring and blending these areas. Here I'm just going to show you to see what it's done. But it has not affected the texture of the image. I'm going to select this area here. To blend that better. Now you always want to remember that what you do to the face, you do to the body also. So I'm going to come down here. Now I'm going to move on to the high layer. And you can use several different tools for this. I like to use the healing brush tool and the patch tool, but I'm going to start off with the healing brush tool. And you want to zoom in quite close. Now that we're working with texture, we can get rid of blemishes or spots or distracting elements or clean up eyebrows. So you want to have not a fully hard brush, but maybe somewhere in between super soft and super hard. And you want to keep the sizing to about the size of the blemish that you're taking away. So I'm going to sample next here and then click over. And here you can see that I'm getting rid of these stray hairs. And we're just taking texture from beside the blemish and replacing it. And you can see what that has done. It's very quick and very, I think, fairly easy to use, and this is why I enjoy using frequency separation. Because it's fairly quick, fairly easy, and it gives me the results that I want. And you're going to want to do this over her entire face and wherever there's skin, and you can also use it on the hair. If there was something in the hair that you wanted to get rid of, dirt, a leaf, some lint, whatever. And you can also use this, like I did with the stray hairs down here, with other stray hairs around on the face if they are distracting, or if you just don't like them. And how much you do is totally up to you. There are some images where I want perfect porcelain doll-like skin, so almost fake, so I do a lot more. And some images I just want to take away the things that are distracting, because the goal is to present the subject in a way that's in the way that someone would see them with their eyes, because when we look at people, we're not staring at their pores, and that's not what we notice. We notice how interesting and beautiful they are. But a camera lens picks up a lot more detail, and a simple tiny blemish can look glaringly obvious. And so that's why I use frequency separation to do skin work. And you can see what I've done so far here. And you always want to sample near the blemish that you are trying to remove, because you're taking the texture and moving it over to cover up blemishes or any distractions that you're trying to get rid of. You can also use this to smooth out lips. Sometimes chapped lips are an issue. And you can use this to smooth out some lines if you want, but you don't have to. And you can use this to cover up some of the small hairs on the face if you feel they are a distraction. And really this is all just up to you and your personal taste and what you think looks good. Or what you think your image needs. I'm going to zoom out a little just to show you the difference. Now you would do this over her entire skin, so you could get rid of something like this. I think moles and beauty marks are awesome, but sometimes they can be distracting in an image. Now if you can tell that this isn't really doing anything to get rid of this here, and because this is not texture anymore, it's moved on to a color and the tones in the image. So we're going to go back down to the low layer, and I'm going to show you how we can even out some tones. I like to use the clone tool on lighten mode and the opacity down in around the 30s, and you want to take your flow down too. So I'm going to make my brush smaller, and you want a very soft brush. And I'm just going to sample from here and kind of paint over where that beauty mark was. And you can zoom out to see, and we're working on the low layer because we're working on tones, not on the texture layer. Then we can move back up to her face and get rid of this dark area here. Very easy with the clone tool on lighten mode. You can see. And then get rid of other dark areas. And that's too much, so we can go to our history and remove this. I'm going to get a bit of a bigger brush. I'm going to select down here and paint in underneath the eye here. And go over on this side. And you're only working with light and you're not messing with the texture. So we're not painting over these hairs here. And I like to lighten up this spot a little. And then here I want to kind of smooth this out. So I'm going to get a bit of a larger brush and sample from here and kind of just paint over a bit, and on the other side here too. And if we zoom out, you can see what we've done. And here's a bit of a dark area, so I'm going to sample and paint over it. And maybe kind of smooth this out too. I'm going to take my opacity down a little. I'm just kind of smoothing out the transition here, just to make it look a little better. And you can see what we've done. Now, whenever you do something to the face, you want to do it to the body. So here we have kind of this either bathing suit line or a tank top line, and I'm going to use my patch tool here, and I'm still on my low layer, and I'm going to select this and slide it over and replace that line with the tones over here. You can also use this to get rid of some darker spots or blotches or blemishes that are color or tones, so you're not messing with the texture. Because sometimes you don't need to lighten something, you need to darken it, and the patch tool is a good way to do that. So let's zoom out a bit. And this is where we started with, and this is what we've done so far. And I'll show you how to use the patch tool on the face too. You can just slide it over or replace it with color or tones that you want. So it's not blotchy. I'm going to work on the forehead here in the texture with, and you can also, I'm going to show you how I use the patch tool to get rid of blemishes and distractions. You just select what you want to get rid of and slide it over and replace it with the texture. It's like using the healing brush tool, except you're not clicking, you're just selecting and sliding, but it's basically the same thing. And sometimes one method will work for certain distractions and the other one won't. So sometimes you have to try a couple different methods until you get the results you want. And you can take this as extreme as you want. Like I said before, it's all personal taste, or whatever you feel your picture needs, or whatever your picture calls for. And you can select bigger pieces if you want. It is all up to you, whatever works for your image. And this is a tone problem. I'm going to get in here really quick. Place this texture in here. You can bring it down here and replace it, or just leave it how it was. It's all up to you. You can slide this over. Whatever you need to do. You just go until you're satisfied, and then you are finished with your skin work. In this tutorial, I'm going to talk about and show you how I do dodge and burn on the skin after I have done the frequency separation. The first thing is to create a new layer And on the mode, you want to go to soft light, fill with soft light neutral color 50% gray. And I'm going to duplicate this and name this one highlights. And this other one I'm going to name shadows. So on the highlights, we're going to use our brush tool, and on this soft light mode and the opacity, I'm going to keep it on 100% because you can always take it down and fix the opacity of this layer. So on the brush tool, you want to use a white for the highlights, and your brush should not be hard, it should be soft. So I'm going to use a pretty big brush to start off with. And for the highlights, you're just painting on where the light is. So you're just following where the light is, and you can see pretty plainly where the light is falling on the model here. So I'm just going to paint on her forehead here, and under here, this little triangle, and bring it up here, and go down here on her chest and her shoulder, bring it down her arm, and paint a little here underneath her on her neck. So now I'm going to zoom in a little and take my brush down and follow this highlight here on her nose. I'm going to use a smaller brush to really highlight that line, and take a bigger brush and do the bridge of her nose here. I'm going to take the opacity down just a tiny bit to fix this area here, and bring it back up. And I'm going to go to her Cupid's bow area here and use a very small brush to highlight where the light is hitting her here and on her lips, and of course down here on her chin. I'm going to bring this down because this is too much. Bring it down to here, and then I'm going to use a smaller brush here and highlight her collarbone where the light is falling, and then the neck area here too. And take my opacity down just a bit. Now here you can also highlight the eyes, and I usually do. It makes the eyes look bigger. And for her makeup, I actually need to highlight this area. I'm going to take the opacity up just a tiny bit. But you can go here on the waterline, and this will make the eyes appear bigger too. And on the whites of the eyes. Do this to both eyes, obviously, and then paint in the little highlights. I'm going to go to 100 of the eyes and bring it down a little and paint in the irises to make her eyes pop. Now I'm also going to use this to highlight under the eyebrow. And we're going to zoom out and see what we have done so far. Now you can also use this to highlight the hair where the light is falling. So to highlight her hair, And you can see what that has done. Just really highlighted the area. Now I'm going to move on to shadows, and you're still using your brush tool on soft light mode, and I always bring the opacity down on shadows because it's always too much. But you're not going to use white, you're going to use black. And you're just going to highlight, or not highlight, but you're just going to paint over the dark areas or where you need them. And I always do at the hairline, and you can follow where the shadows are, but I'm not going to darken that because I feel like it's dark enough already. But I am going to go underneath her jawline to really accentuate the bottom of her jawline and here at the hairline. And I'm going to go over her eyebrows because I like a good defined eyebrow. And don't worry about if it looks too dark right now. We can always take the opacity down just like we did with the highlights. And you can follow along where the shadows are. And then I always go here on the sides of her nose to really define the nose. And do some here. And I always go and darken up the lips. And yes, this looks very dramatic right now, but we are going to take this down. Then I'm going to use a bigger brush here to kind of define where her collarbone is. And we're going to take this way down. You see what we've done? We have defined the shadows. And you can also go in and darken up the pupils and on the outside of the irises to make them pop even more. And sometimes I like to go in and really define the outer corners of the lips. It makes them look a little fuller. And so of course you can go back and see what you've done and decide if it's too much or too little, if you wanted more, if you wanted a lot less. It's all up to your personal taste. I'm going to bring this about here. Let me bring this up a little bit. And I'm going to go back on the highlights and use a lower opacity here. I'm going to go over this area here, just slightly. And that is how I dodge and burn after doing frequency separation. So after using frequency separation, dodging and burning, I always desaturate my skin. And there's multiple ways to do this. You can use the hue and saturation, and I just bring it down. And the reason I do this is because I prefer desaturated skin. Aesthetically, it is just pleasing to me, and it's just a rule. I always desaturate the skin. And so you can see. And sometimes after desaturating the skin, I will go back and I would erase it off of the eyes to retain the color. And if you want, sometimes I would go back and erase it off of the lips. But that's all personal preference, or if you wanted to bring back some of the color in the hair or in the surroundings. Obviously in this image there's not much surroundings. I think I'm actually going to take it down a little bit more. I like the pale desaturated skin tone look, and so this looks a lot better. The next thing that a lot of the times that I do is I go to curves. I do a curves layer and go on the blue and bring up the blue in the shadows slightly and bring the yellows in the highlights and do a bit of red slightly. And then I always bring this down. And that's basically what I do every single time for skin.